All right, we're going to open it for questions. We have two microphones here. Just raise your hand and, yes, Rob.
Well, thank you to all the panelists for those wonderful presentations. Nuri, I especially want to thank and congratulate you for the work that you're doing as chair of USIF. It's just fantastic. My own experience in sitting in your chair at the commission as chairing it led me to a conclusion that really underscores one of your points, and I want to bring it out so nobody misses it. The fact that powerful people want to remain in power is both no news to anybody who's ever been a member of the human race, right, and also the eighth wonder of the world. It's an amazing desire, and people will do anything to remain in power. The conclusion I drew is that the great fear of tyrants like the leadership of the CCP is any civil society organization that can become the rallying point for resistance to the regime. Whether that organization is religious or not. Now, if the organization is religious, then I think you're right. There's an extra dimension because now there's a recognition of something that relativizes the power of the leadership. There's something above, something in whose name we can call down judgment on the political leaders. But even if it's not religious in any sense that we would recognize, it poses a threat. This, I think, helps to explain the weird obsession of the CCP with the Falun Gong and the oppression of the Falun Gong, which, if you think about it, is hard to make any sense of whatsoever. My experience taught me that the Chinese leadership, the regime leadership, believes that the Soviets made a terrible mistake when they allowed the Catholic Church to function and function independently in Poland. Right. That, of course, led to the ultimate unraveling of the whole Soviet regime. And I think that is what the CCP has learned all too well. Right. And they want to make sure that never happens on their watch to them. And I think that helps to account for the ferocity with which they oppress even the Falun Gong.
Thank you. Those are great points. Historically, the Chinese have been very effective and clever learning lessons from other regimes. For example, in post-Soviet Union, or end of the Cold War, they promised themselves, this is not going to be our future. We're not going to let the religious communities to intend them with China's potential enemy, quote unquote, the West, to come together to destroy the party leadership. And then the other I lost my track of thought. The other thing that they have been doing now is to export, as I noted earlier, their governance style. And this has been gaining ground especially in the developing countries. And also they're using, and as I also mentioned earlier, through economic coercion. For example, in the case of Uyghur genocide, there's no single powerful Muslim voice except for a few countries signed on an innocuous UN letter. The Chinese have about 40-some countries, and vast majority Muslim countries. And then the US-led Western governments plus Japan run around 22 countries. That in of itself explained how effective the Chinese have been promoting, not only keeping the lid domestically, but also trying to normalize using their diplomatic influence in agencies like the UN. UN Secretary General to this day has not spoken out. Catholic bishops here in Vatican have not raised their voice against the arrest of Cardinal Zenz. That is wrong. So the one thing that the international community has not done is to recognize and identify and call it what it is that is coming out of Beijing.
Thank you. Yes. Mark.
Mark Hill, Notre Dame London Law Programme. Thank you all very much indeed for focusing on the points you have. And I've picked up very clearly the view shared across the panel and by you, Madam Chairman, that governments are frightened or intimidated by religion. And I think the way they cope with that is divide and rule. They deal with different religions, different minorities separately. The real key, I think, to religious liberty, echoing what Dean Marcus said at the beginning, is that across all faith communities, and including those from a secular or humanist standpoint, they need to be united, not in their doctrine, but in their common belief that freedom of religion is a goal to which they can properly aspire. And I know my experience in the United Kingdom is perhaps somewhat different from that of the panelists. But for years now, I have been representing different religious organizations and responding to government legislation which affects them across the board. And it is fantastically empowering to have behind me and instructing me people of faith who don't agree on any matter of doctrine, but who are passionate that for themselves, collectively and individually, that freedom of religion genuinely matters. And I would love to hear from the panelists of practical ways whereby people across all faith communities can engage with government at the highest level to ensure that that religious liberty is a right guaranteed for all.
I'm going to take the privilege of being the Madam Chair to just make a comment and thank you for your question. We all remember 9/11. We're all Muslim Americans, the three of us. I remember the reaction of a lot of groups and from different religious groups to Muslims in the United States or Islam in general. Naturally, it was the first exposure to many Americans to Islam was 9/11, or the Middle East was 9/11. And for those of us who work on the right of the political spectrum, it became to us a form, at least speaking for myself, of educating the others about my faith. My husband always reminds me that half of life is being in the room. You sit in the room, you meet people, they get to know you. I try to use my charm too. But it's astonishing that people, when they use religious freedom or religious liberty in the United States, it only meant Christians and sometimes Jews. It was never everyone else. During the Trump administration, religious freedom became a high priority for the Trump administration on international and foreign policy. And all of a sudden, you saw all this coalition of different religious groups coming together, including the one that did not like Muslims after 9/11, and became outspoken. And the defenders of Muslims, Uyghurs, Rohingya, served on commissions for religious freedom and worked with all of us as Muslims to ensure that the United States leadership is a true leadership on this issue. So there has been an evolvement, which is, I believe that if there are Irish Americans in the room, and of course there are Mormons, what the history of different religious groups go through when they come to the United States. The Irish, the Mormons, and I think the Muslims took it really easily compared to those others. But there has been progress on that issue. And I think that coalition made even the United States government push forward in a different direction and call the Uyghurs genocide, to what China is doing to the Uyghurs as genocide. The first country in the entire world, and as Nori said, not a single Muslim country spoke and supported that dedication of genocide.
Yes, U.S. leadership is extremely important. I was mentioning this yesterday at the board meeting. globally, I think we should start considering the religious persecution in the context of national security. I was recently, I attended a International Religious Freedom Summit organized by former Ambassador Sam Brownback. He reminded us something very important in the last 50 years. The genocidal actions, crimes against humanity committed against most of the genocide have been involved religious communities. And also, I was just only focusing on 10 years, Yazidi genocide in 2012, and then the Rohingya genocide, and then the Uyghur genocide. Why do we keep seeing genocide repeatedly? Because we're failing to miss the early warning sign. In the United States, we have a statutory mandate under the Elie Wiesel Atrocities Prevention Act. We keep seeing the genocide. So the reason is now that I participate in some meetings, the religious freedom, religious persecution issues never makes to the top of the agenda and talking points. We only deal with it when it becomes a humanitarian disaster, mass migration, refugee, war, genocide, or crimes against humanity. This becomes very costly when you let it happen to that level. In the case of China, as Sama mentioned, United States only made genocide determination previously 6 times, so the Uyghur genocide is number 7. Even after U.S. signed on in the Genocide Convention for so many years, because they don't want to be in a box situation. When you call a government for committing genocide, you have to adjust your foreign policy. You have to adjust your economic relationship. And now the United States is almost stuck in this business because China is so important in the trade relationship. Even some of the supply chain problems, the inflation problems may have been linked to that particular issue. So I think the governments should proactively stop the genocide from occurring when they see the early warning signs. So this is why we keep saying Nigeria is another case. We have to pay attention to Nigeria. I worry that there will be a full swing genocide will surprise us down the road.
Yes, question, new question. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is about U.S. leadership on this issue. We've gone hard on China, and we should, but there are other places like Saudi Arabia, for example, and especially when we think of religious liberty and freedom as a human rights issue. With Saudi Arabia, we do speak, about it needing to, make it a pariah state. But obviously, there's no question of sanctioning Saudi Arabia because of geopolitical interests. If we look at a place like Israel and the Palestinians, we have a similar situation. And so my question is, do we risk undermining our own advocacy for religious liberty when different standards are applied because they serve different geopolitical interests?
I'm just going to jump in here and say, in a way, I don't just want to make this about America because people are here from all over the world. But I think that that's obvious when it comes to trade and commerce, etc., for whether it's Saudi Arabia or whether it's China or anywhere else. Internally, Americans will be protecting their religious freedoms and fighting through the courts, as we have seen recently. But when it comes to internationally, there is an otherization. Those people are not Americans, they're not vote getters, they're not going to give money to campaigns. They are not perhaps as human. Maybe the dignity of the Christians in Nigeria is not as important to the people in power as a church attack in Oklahoma. I think that's something as a new American that I do see. But one of the things I hate to end the session without actually talking about way forward. Okay, there has to be, so I'm just going to throw out a couple of quick ideas that I have. Number one, the US and the international community that works on religious freedom. we need to continue to strive for laws and legal protections in every jurisdiction. This requires doing away with discriminatory laws and legislation that go against Article 18. For example, blasphemy and apostasy laws all over the world. That needs to be, they're spreading all over the Middle East, they're spreading in North Africa, they're spreading all over. And blasphemy laws and apostasy laws attack religious freedom, the freedom of those people, I think at the very root. Second, and many of us are already working on this, the 3 A's: awareness, activism, and advocacy. We need to make the body public aware of why religious freedom is an important element of human rights and civil liberties. This should not be, again, I'm coming back to why religious freedom workers, advocates, and human rights advocates need to work together as in the same way as religious leaders work through interfaith groups. We now have to look at the advocacy level and create some kind of, finally, my last point is what can be done relating to the creation of the social and political climate for protecting religious liberty. So we have to make it an issue in the public square in all of these countries, whether it's curriculum change, whether it's changing laws, whether it's pushing on politicians who are not listening. So thank you very much.
Running out of time for Q&A, but I'm sure our panelists would love to answer any questions on the side. I want to give 1 minute to Professor Alves to close us down.
Well, I'll just like to comment on what Professor Mark and Sama mentioned earlier, and maybe take the opportunity to mention one of the philosophers of Italy, like Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. Okay. Well, he wrote the Oration on the Dignity of Man, and he drew from different religious perspectives to promote the idea of dignity for everyone. And I believe religious discourse and narratives can contribute to the promotion of human dignity and human rights, the same way that the legal discourse can contribute to the promotion of the same objectives. And we have been experiencing this type of collaboration in Brazil. We have commissions of religious freedom and religious diversity in many parts of the country. And recently, we organized a symposium in collaboration with the International Center for Law and Religion Studies in Brazil, with representatives from minority and majority groups. And we can see this collaboration happening in Brazil. And of course, we have lots of challenges. They are not comparable to other parts of the world, but we have successful experiences there as well. Okay, thank you, Samuel.
Thank you. We're running out of time. I would like to please help me thank our panelists and the Madam Chair for doing a great job. And thank you for your attention.